How do you survive a place where the air itself tries to kill you? At minus 50 degrees Celsius, metal shatters, breath freezes, and exposed skin can die in minutes. No forests, no permanent shelter, no firewood. And yet, for over 1,000 years, Mongol families didn't just endure this world. They built a life in it. A system so precise, so perfectly adapted, that even today, modern engineers are still trying to understand it. The Mongolian steppe in winter is not simply cold. It is structurally hostile to human life. Stretching wider than Western Europe, this treeless expanse offers no natural refuge. No forests to break the wind. No valleys deep enough to hide. Only open land, exposed in every direction. Winds descend from Siberia, accelerating across the plains with nothing to slow them down. They don't just blow, they cut. They strip away heat through convection, pulling warmth from the human body faster than it can ever be replaced. At minus 50 degrees Celsius, survival isn't about comfort. It's about physics. It's about how long your body can hold on to heat before the cold takes it. Metal becomes brittle. Fuel thickens. Breath freezes in the air before it can disappear. And then comes the Dzud, a catastrophic winter where deep snow seals the ground like concrete, locking away the grass beneath. Temperatures collapse even further. Storms arrive without warning. Entire ecosystems begin to fail. Livestock, sheep, goats, horses, cannot graze. They weaken, then die. Water sources freeze solid, forcing desperate measures just to access a single drop. The land doesn't just grow cold. It becomes a trap. Silent, unforgiving, lethal, unless you know exactly how to read it. Long before a single shelter is built, survival begins with a decision. Where do you stop? On the Mongolian steppe, that question carries the weight of life and death. To an untrained eye, the landscape feels empty, uniform. An endless stretch of frozen grassland buried beneath snow. But to Mongol herders, it is anything but empty. It is a map written in subtle clues. A shallow depression in the land can mean reduced wind exposure. A line of rock outcroppings can break the force of incoming storms. Even the smallest shift in terrain can redirect air currents that would otherwise strip heat away. They read the land the way others read text, decoding patterns invisible to most. And above all, they search for one critical feature: the southern face of terrain. This is where the land turns toward the sun, where even in the dead of winter, a few extra hours of light can make a measurable difference. This practice, known as finding the shadow of the mountain, was never about poetry. It was about precision. A correctly chosen site could reduce wind exposure by a significant margin. It could capture solar radiation just enough to raise temperatures by a few degrees. And in extreme cold, a difference of even 3 degrees Celsius is not minor. It is decisive. It can determine whether snow softens enough for animals to dig through and reach the grass below, or hardens into an unbreakable layer that seals off all food. The wrong location doesn't just mean discomfort. It means starvation, exposure, collapse, not just for one person, but for the entire herd and everything that depends on it. Timing was everything. On the Mongolian steppe, survival didn't begin with movement. It began with knowing exactly when to move. Leave too early, and the cost was hidden but severe. Animals would lose access to the final weeks of autumn grazing, the last opportunity to build the fat reserves that would carry them through winter. Without that stored energy, even the strongest herd could weaken before the cold truly arrived. But wait too long, and the steppe would close behind you. Snow would fall fast and deep, sealing migration routes in a matter of hours. What had once been open land would become impassable terrain, a frozen barrier trapping families and livestock in the open. Herders didn't rely on forecasts or instruments. They relied on patterns observed, remembered, and passed down across generations. The shape and movement of clouds, the direction and intensity of shifting winds, the subtle changes in animal behavior, restlessness, feeding patterns, the way herds reacted to distant pressure in the air. This wasn't instinct alone. It was accumulated knowledge, refined over centuries. A form of predictive survival science. When the signs aligned, entire communities would begin their movement. Not a chaotic migration, but a controlled, deliberate retreat. Families, children, elders, alongside hundreds, sometimes thousands, of animals, moving across a landscape that was becoming more dangerous with every passing day. There was no randomness in their path. Every step had been considered in advance, because once winter fully arrived, once the steppe turned from harsh to lethal, there were no corrections, no alternate routes, no second attempts, only the consequences of a single decision, made at exactly the right time or not at all. When they arrived, they didn't build houses. They built a system. On the open steppe, a single yurt, no matter how well made, was never enough. Alone, it stood exposed to the full force of winter. Wind would wrap around it, press against it, and slowly pull heat away from within. But the Mongols understood something deeper. Survival wasn't about strengthening one structure. It was about how structures worked together. So they arranged their dwellings in a deliberate formation, a circle known as a karoo. At first glance, it might seem simple, but in reality, it was a carefully engineered layout shaped by generations of experience. Each yurt became part of a larger system. Each wall, each curve, each position calculated. Placed side by side, the structures formed a continuous barrier at ground level. Not a solid wall, but something more adaptive. A layered defense that disrupted the flow of wind where it was most dangerous. Because the deadliest cold doesn't come from above. It moves close to the ground. A horizontal current of freezing air that strips heat from anything in its path. The circular formation broke that current. Wind, that once rushed across open land, was forced upward, deflected over the camp instead of through it. And inside the circle, something remarkable began to happen. The air changed. Wind speeds dropped sharply. Snow drifted differently. Heat, however small, was no longer instantly carried away. A microclimate formed. Invisible, but measurable. Temperatures inside the formation could rise by several degrees. Not enough to feel warm, but enough to survive. Because in extreme cold, survival is not about comfort. It's about thresholds. The line between life and death can be defined by just a few degrees. And within that fragile margin, this engineered pocket of stillness and warmth became everything. But the real secret wasn't the structures. It was what they protected. At the center of the formation, herders gathered their animals. Sheep, goats, cattle, not randomly, but with intention. Hundreds of living bodies pressed tightly together, breathing, moving, generating heat. Individually, each animal produced only a small amount of warmth, barely noticeable against the vast cold of the steppe. But together, they became something else entirely. A dense cluster of livestock could raise the surrounding temperature by as much as 10 degrees Celsius. Not through fire, not through fuel, but through life itself. Their bodies formed a second layer of defense. They absorbed residual wind that slipped past the outer ring of yurts. They slowed air movement. They released constant, low-level heat into the enclosed space. The result was stability. A more controlled environment within an otherwise uncontrollable landscape. This was not an accident of proximity. It was design. A symbiotic system, refined over generations. Humans shielded the animals from direct exposure, and the animals, in return, shielded the humans from the full force of the cold. A shared survival strategy. A living, breathing engine, turning warmth into resilience and vulnerability into strength. Step inside a Mongol yurt, and you are stepping into one of the most refined survival structures ever created. At first glance, it may seem simple. Wood, felt, rope, but every element serves a purpose. Its circular shape isn't aesthetic. It's aerodynamic. Wind doesn't strike it head-on. It flows around it diverted, weakened, redirected. There are no sharp corners to catch pressure. No flat walls to absorb impact. Above, the domed roof spreads force evenly across the frame, allowing the structure to withstand heavy snow without collapsing under its weight. But the true brilliance lies in what surrounds you. The walls. Layer upon layer of felt-dense compressed wool fibers. Interlock to form a barrier filled with microscopic air pockets. And air, when trapped and still, becomes one of the most effective insulators known. This ancient material, developed through centuries of practice, can rival modern synthetic insulation in its ability to slow heat loss. In extreme winter conditions, up to 12 layers could be added, each one increasing the structure's ability to hold warmth inside. The result is subtle but critical. When outside temperatures plunge to -50 degrees Celsius, the interior can remain 30 to 40 degrees warmer. Still cold, still harsh, but no longer lethal. Not designed for comfort, but engineered precisely for survival. At the center of the yurt burns a fire. Not wood. There are no forests on the open steppe. No logs to gather, no branches to store. Instead, the fuel comes from the animals themselves. Dried dung, carefully collected, shaped, and cured in the open air, becomes the primary source of heat. It burns hotter than it looks, cleaner than expected, and more consistently than many natural fuels available in this environment. In a land without trees, nothing is wasted. Everything becomes part of the system. Above the fire, at the peak of the yurt, sits an opening. The tonneau, simple in appearance, but critical in function. As the fire burns, hot air rises naturally toward the roof. It escapes through the opening, pulling fresh, oxygen-rich air in from lower gaps near the ground. This creates a continuous flow, a natural convection cycle. Without it, the interior would quickly become dangerous. Carbon monoxide, colorless, odorless, could build to lethal levels within minutes. But with this design, the air is constantly refreshed. Heat circulates. Smoke exits. The system breathes. And as it does, it distributes warmth evenly across the interior space, preventing cold pockets from forming and maximizing the efficiency of every bit of fuel burned. This is not primitive design. It is controlled thermal engineering, a balance of fire, airflow, and human survival. A system built not just to generate heat, but to manage it safely in one of the harshest climates on Earth. Night is when the steppe becomes truly deadly. As the sun disappears, the last trace of warmth vanishes with it. Temperatures drop fast, often to their lowest point just before dawn. The wind, no longer broken by daytime thermals, cuts harder across the land. This is when survival shifts from structure to strategy. Inside the yurt, space is no longer about comfort. It is about heat. Families sleep close together, intentionally, tightly, close enough to share body warmth through the long, freezing hours. No one undresses. Layers are never removed. Heavy wool robes remain on the body, their thickness turning clothing into insulation, and insulation into bedding. Fur-lined garments and blankets trap warm air close to the skin, slowing the steady loss of heat into the surrounding cold. Position matters. Children are placed between adults, where body heat is strongest and most stable. The elderly, more vulnerable to cold, are positioned closest to the fire, where even a slight increase in warmth can be critical. And on the coldest nights, when temperatures fall beyond what the shelter alone can handle, another element is added to the system. Newborn animals are brought inside, not as an act of compassion, but as a calculated part of survival. Their small bodies release heat continuously through the night, adding just enough warmth to shift the balance. A few degrees, sometimes less. But in this environment, that is enough. Every detail is deliberate. Every position, every layer, every movement considered. Because here, survival is not about fighting the cold. It is about managing it, 1 degree at a time. So how did they survive a place where the air itself tries to kill you? Not by fighting the environment, not by forcing it to change, and not by overpowering it with brute strength or permanent structures. They survived by understanding it completely. Every wind pattern, every shift in temperature, every hidden signal written into the land. The Mongols didn't build against nature. They built with it. They studied how wind moved across open ground and turned it into a shield. They understood how living bodies generated heat and turned animals into a source of warmth. They mastered movement, not as escape, but as stability in a changing environment. Their homes were never fixed. They could be dismantled at sunrise and rebuilt by nightfall, wherever conditions demanded. Nothing permanent, nothing wasted, no walls left behind, only knowledge. Knowledge refined over generations, carried not in books, but in memory, in practice, in instinct. And in a world now facing more extreme climates, more uncertainty, and more fragile systems, their approach offers something rare. A different way of thinking. Not domination over nature, but alignment with it. Not resistance against harsh conditions, but precision within them. Because true survival isn't about controlling the world around you. It's about understanding it well enough to live inside it. If humanity has survived the coldest nights on Earth, what else have we already learned and forgotten? This is just one story, hidden in the past. There are many more waiting to be uncovered. Subscribe and step deeper into the forgotten engineering of survival.